In this demo, I'm going to take the role of a crime analyst or an investigator in the Oakland Police Department who's just been assigned a homicide to investigate. If I look over to the right on the dashboard, I can see that new homicide that's been assigned to me. If I click on that notification, it will open the case in a full screen view, where I'm given some basic details about the case, such as the case number, the date it was opened, and some related information. Here we have the homicide that's actually related to this case. If I click on that homicide, I'll get all of the detailed information about it, which includes things like street address, just case number, description, geolocation. That geolocation is actually derived from this address. So behind the scenes, Visallo is always enriching the data, and street addresses are one thing that we enrich. So anytime Visallo sees a street address, it will use a configurable geocoder to find the latitude and longitude corresponding to that address so that this homicide can then be placed on a map. The other piece of information we have for this investigation is a witness statement by Jessica Watterson. Similarly, I've taken the street address and found the geolocation. And there are three things that the officer took down from the witness. The first is that the witness observed a black male leaving the scene as a passenger in a white Toyota Highlander. She wasn't able to get any identifying information from the vehicle or the driver, but did notice that the witness had a tattoo on the right side of his neck. So armed with these three pieces of information, I'm going to do an investigation of Visallo. So if I come back over to the main window of Visallo, I'll click on the Cases button on the left. Within Visallo, all of your work and analysis is organized into cases. Here I'm going to create a new case for this investigation. I'll give it any name I want, click the Add button, and now I'm looking at a new case. Now within a case, Visallo has what we call work products. We can have a graph or a map work product, and we can have as many of these as we want for an investigation. And each of them can have their own data set. For this demo, I'm going to create one of each. So I'll create a graph, and we'll name that our suspects graph. And I'll create a map, and we'll name that incidents. Now, if I go back over to this full screen view, I'm going to take this case record and just drag it over here to the main window, drop it on the graph, and this is where we'll start our investigation. So if I click on this case, sliding over from the right is what we call the inspector window, which has the same details that we saw in that full screen view. So for example, if I open up the incident, here's that homicide, which I can click, drag over onto my graph, and the relationship is automatically shown. Another way I could have added related information to this case is to have right-clicked on the menu item and selected Add Related. This gives me an opportunity to filter down the related items that I actually want to add to the graph. So if I was only interested in arrests or calls for service, for example, I could select those. If I leave it blank, I get all entity types. Similarly, I could select which relationships I was interested in adding. If I leave it blank, I get everything. In this case, I'm going to leave it blank. So when I click the Add Related button, here I have the same three basic things that I had on the full screen view. But now I have it on the graph where I'm going to start my investigation. So to begin, I'm actually going to start with this homicide. So I might want to actually see where this is geographically. So I'm going to hit Control-C and copy that homicide record and paste it over onto the map. Now as I drill down in here, we'll see that this actually occurs in Oakland, California, in a fairly busy area of the city. If we have anybody patrolling the area, it's likely that the trunk-mounted cameras are automatically recognizing some license plates. So I might be interested to know which vehicles have been in the general vicinity of this homicide. So one quick way that I could do that is to actually start from this geolocation and click on the Information Disclosure button. From there, we'll get some information such as when was this property last modified, by whom, but I can also search by that value. And by default, Visallo is going to search for things of similar kind, so other incidents, within, by default, a 1 kilometer radius of that latitude and longitude. So in this case, I'm actually not interested in incidents, so I will just remove that filter and we'll add a new one for license plate reads. So now I'm looking for license plate reads within a 1 kilometer radius of that homicide. And you can see pretty quickly that there are 44,000 of them. Now that's probably more than we want to look at right now. But if I take a quick look at this homicide, it appears to have taken place pretty close to the intersection of these two major freeways. I can click on the Search on Map feature, and I can reduce the radius at which I want to search for license plate reads, maybe move it a little bit, and now we're down to 25,000, about half of what we had before. But in reality, I'm not interested in every vehicle that's ever been within 1 kilometer of that homicide. I'm only interested in the ones that were there roughly the same time that the homicide occurred. So since I know when that date was, I can go ahead and add an additional filter to this search. So here I will add a filter for a read date, and we'll make this a date range filter. And this homicide occurred back on August 4th, so we'll choose August 4th and a few hours before. And then for the after date, we'll do the same. We'll choose August 4th and a few hours after. And now we're down to 80 search results, which is a much more reasonable number. You'll see here that wherever we have an actual picture of the license plate, it's been included in the search result view. If I click on any of the search results, the inspector shows all the details about the vehicle, the color, the make, the model, and of course has the picture if we have it as well. And I'm going to just select any one record and hit Control A on my keyboard to select all of them, and then drag and drop them onto the map. So now we see we have 81 things now on our map. So as I drill back in and clear out some of my other windows, we'll see where these things actually occur. It appears that we likely had a patrol car along 7th Street, along Broadway, and then probably along 6th Street as well. So if we want to get a better idea of when these license plates were recorded, I can actually open the timeline. And as I zoom in on here, you'll see some green bars and some purple bars. So if I want to know what all of those colors mean, I can come over to the configuration of the timeline. It'll show me that the purple is actually an incident. That's the original homicide that I dropped on this map. Whereas all of the greens are my license plate reads. Now, if I were doing an investigation and the items on my map had many different date properties, they would show up multiple times on the timeline corresponding to each date property. And in such cases, you may not actually care about each date property. So one of the nice features of the timeline is that you can actually turn off certain dates from showing up on the timeline. So for example, if I didn't care about license plate reads, I could turn those off, and you'll notice all of the green things have disappeared. For this investigation, I obviously care about those, so I'm going to leave them on. If I click on any of the bars within the timeline, all of the corresponding elements on the map are now shown in blue. So you'll see a lot of the ones here along 7th Street are shown in blue. Down here on 6th Street, there's 10 here that are shown in blue as well. One that's a little bit different is this number 6 right here. So the 6 is indicating that there are 6 items on the map that are roughly in the same location. So rather than stacking 6 pins on top of each other, we've clustered them and given you the number there, 6. And you'll also notice that there's a blue ring around that 6 that doesn't go quite all the way. So this is giving an indication of roughly how many of those 6, in this case, probably 5, of those 6 are actually within this time range that we've just selected. For all of the elements on the map within this time range, I now have a histogram breakdown of each of their properties by value. For this investigation, I'm actually most interested in all these license plate reads that are close in time to the homicide. So I can click and drag a time selection window around all of those items on the timeline, and it will show me which license plate reads occurred roughly in the same time as that homicide. So now is when I will actually use the histogram feature. So if you can remember back from the witness statement, we were looking for a white Toyota Highlander. So from this histogram, I can drill in and make smaller and smaller selections on my map. So here I will click on white, and then we have Toyota, Fords, and Infinitis. I'll click on Toyotas, and then finally on Highlanders. And now we're down to 4 white Toyota Highlanders that were in the vicinity of the homicide within a few hours before or after. So if I'm curious to see where exactly on this map were those Toyota Highlanders, I can just hover over the Highlander bar here in the histogram, and all of the items on the map that are not white Toyota Highlanders have now become transparent. So most of the things along 7th Street, for example. The ones that do have Toyota Highlanders in their clusters are now shown as fractions. So for example, if you look down here at the 37, when I hover over the Highlander, you'll see that it's turned into a fraction that now says 2 out of 37. This is telling you that 2 of the 37 items in that cluster are actually white Toyota Highlanders. Similarly, the ones along Broadway to the right, you'll see that they each say 1/3. That's telling you that 1 of the 3 in each of those clusters is a white Toyota Highlander. So this is just a really useful feature to give you some contextual awareness of where geographically are the items that show up within the histogram. So given that I have 4 white Toyota Highlanders, which I happen to be interested in this for investigation, maybe the first thing I want to do is actually just open these in a full screen view just to get a look at them for a little bit of a sanity check. Make sure that they are indeed white Toyota Highlanders. If I just do a quick visual inspection, They do all indeed look like white Toyota Highlanders. So I'll come back over to Visallo, and since I already have them selected, I'll hit Control-C here, and I'll come back over to the graph that I had created originally. I'll clear out some of my windows here. We'll close a timeline because we're done with it, and I'll paste those 4 things onto my graph. So one of the first things I might be interested to know is that based on these 4 license plate reads, do I have any vehicle registration records corresponding to any of them? So I'll select all of those, and I'll right-click and choose to Add Related. In this case, I'll actually filter it down, whereas I didn't before, to only adding the related vehicles. And so when I do that, Visallo is going to find that there are actually 4 vehicle registration records. And so I'm going to do that one more time, because what I'm interested to know is, do I have anyone in my system, a convicted criminal, that owns one of these 4 Toyota Highlanders? So in this case, I'll trim it down to just individuals, add the related ones, and it turns out that I actually do have one person in my system with a criminal record that owns one of my Toyota Highlanders, and that's Alex Chittum. It turns out that Alex has been arrested previously, once for drunkenness and a second time for felony assault. But unfortunately, Alex does not match my witness description. But it's possible he was the driver. So let's see if we can use Visallo to find someone that matches that witness description. So when I come back over here to my Find window, I see that I have my previous search here. I'll hit the X to clear out all of the criteria. And I'm looking for individuals. And I'm looking for specifically individuals with a scar, mark, or tattoo. In this case, I'm looking for tattoos. And I have 239 individuals in my system with tattoos. But if I add the extra piece of information that it was on the neck, I'm down to 14 search results. So given that I have the mugshots here for each person in the search results, I can just visually inspect each one, hold down the Control key, and select everybody that matches my witness description. Once I've done that, I'll just click and drag. And the first thing I might be interested to know is, for any of these 6 people that I just dropped onto my graph, do they have any relationship to Alex Chittum, the owner of one of those white Toyota Highlanders? So one thing that I can ask Visallo to do is find a path between any 2 individuals. So if I right-click on Nelson and ask Visallo to find a path to Alex Chittum, I get a window that explains what Find Path does. So I can trim down and remove some of the relationships that I want to consider from my Find Path operation. By default, I choose all of them, and I can decide how many hops am I willing to consider. What this means is if you can consider Nelson to be this orange circle on the left and Alex the orange one on the right, how many other intermediary entities do I want to consider along my path? So in this case, I'm going 4 hops, which means 3 people in the middle. So I'll click the Find Path operation, and Visallo will actually kick off a background process. Depending on the amount of data you have and how interconnected all of it is, this operation can take some time. So Visallo gives you the opportunity to go ahead and do some other things. It will notify you when it's done and has found results. So in this case, we found one path. If I click on that button, it'll show a dotted line between Nelson and Alex, and it says there are 3 entities. So if I go ahead and click the button to add the missing elements, all 3 of those items will now be shown on the graph. And if I do some quick rearranging, you'll see that both Nelson and Alex have both been arrested for felony assault on the same case. So these 2 individuals clearly have a history together, which is something that I would probably want to share with anybody else who's viewing this case. So if I come back up to the original witness statement, you'll remember that it talked about a black male. This might be Nelson Everett. So I can click and just highlight this section where it says black male and choose to resolve that. And so what this means in Visallo is I'm able to take any text in any document and make a direct link to an entity in the system. In this case, I'm looking for Nelson Everett. So as I search for Nelson Everett and choose him from the list and choose to resolve that, you'll notice 3 things that actually happen. The first and most obvious is that there's now a direct relationship between Jessica Watterson's witness statement and Nelson Everett. There's also the section that I highlighted and chose to resolve is now shown in bold with a green underline and a green background. And lastly, there's now a new section here within my witness statement record for all of the entities that have been referenced from the text below. If this were a really busy graph, and I was curious to know, okay, Nelson is actually referenced, but where is he on the graph? If I hover over Nelson, you'll notice that everything on the graph gets kind of grayed out, except for Nelson, who's now highlighted in blue. So this is a great way to be able to find things on a busy graph. Okay, another thing I might want to do is go ahead and add a comment here to leave for anybody else who might be looking at this witness statement. So I'll just say, it looks like we found our guy. Leave that comment. So if I were to share this case with someone else, I might want to make sure that they focus their attention on both Nelson and Alex. So one way I can do that visually is to select both of them and choose to format those things on the graph. So perhaps I want to make them very large circles with a big red border. Right? And so that's one way that I could show that these two people need to be focused on in a very visual way. I could also add annotations. For example, I might want to add text or arrows or rectangles. In this case, I'll choose a rectangle, and maybe I'll put it here in the middle and just draw this box around these two. I could also add text to maybe call out that I know these two have a history together. And I can maybe position that here in the yellow. And so now anybody else who views this graph would see very clearly that these two individuals are someone that should be focused on. Now, it should be noted that no one else can actually see this case yet because I haven't shared it with anyone. And it's also worth pointing out that any of the changes I've made to the data, so that's the relationship between the witness statement and Nelson, that's the comment that I added, no other users of Visallo are actually going to see that information yet because it is private to my case. So any changes that you make to any data always by default remains private to your case until you choose to publish it. So I click on the 2 down here. So we have a list of the new things that I've done within this case that have not yet been published. So here we have the comment and we have the link between the witness statement and Nelson. So I could choose to publish those, after which time any other user of Visallo looking at any other case would now see this new information. In this case, I'm actually not going to publish it right now, and we're going to share this case with another user. So I'll open a second window and log in as a different user. In this case, I'll log in as the user Jeff, and then I'll put these two windows side by side. And on the window on the left, I'm going to come over to the case settings, and I'm going to share this case with Jeff. So when I choose Jeff's name, Jeff will get a notification that a case was shared with him over on the right. I can change the permission, so by default we give a view permission. I'm going to choose edit, which basically makes Jeff a peer to me on this given case. Now when I come over to Jeff's window and I look in the case window, here is the default one that Jeff is looking at right now, but here is a case that has been shared with Jeff by the user on the left. So we'll open that case and we'll come to the work section and I see the same two work products. So we'll select the graph and I'll hit the fit button on both sides so you can see that they are identical. Now within Visallo, one of the core features that we've developed for collaboration is that we didn't want to have anyone ever have to explicitly share information. No sending of things to someone else to make sure they have the up-to-date copy. No specific button to click to synchronize with other users of the case. Everything is live. So for example, if the user on the left decides to move Alex up to the top right, then within a moment or two, the user on the right will see that same change. Correspondingly, if the user on the right, Jeff, decides to highlight these individuals because they're no longer interesting to the case and remove them, then very quickly they're removed on the left. So everyone's always going to be up to date and in sync at all times. One other thing that's important to point out is that sharing a case with another user does not actually give them access to any data. So to illustrate that, I'm going to click on Nelson. And before this demo, I have given the user on the left, the demo user, some additional privileges that the user on the right does not have. So I'm going to use those now. So to Nelson, I will actually change his visibility, or basically his access control, to a secret level visibility, which the user on the right does not have. So pretty quickly, you'll notice that the user on the right's reference to Nelson has disappeared. This is showing you that even though the user on the left has shared a case with Jeff on the right, Jeff still doesn't see any data that he does not have access to. Okay, let me go back to one window. At this point in time, let's assume that we're going to send an officer to go visit Nelson, visit Alex, perhaps bring them in for questioning. And we now need to do some reporting. So we would do that on Visallo's dashboard. Here I have a default dashboard, and I'm going to just remove everything that's currently on the dashboard and build a new one. And the new one that I'm going to build is based on Save Search cards. Now cards are something that can go on a dashboard within Visallo and can be customized. They're really just rectangular sections of content. The Save Search one happens to be the most powerful one within Visallo. So for this demo, I'm just going to create 4 of those, I'll give them a little bit different orientation than the default. And we'll start from there. These are all saved search cards, and we haven't actually saved any searches. So let's go quickly do that. So I'll come back over to find, we'll clear out those search criteria, and I'll do some just very broad searches. So here I'll save a search just for all incidents. Come up to the save window, give it a name. I'll do another one for calls for service. And finally, I'll do one for traffic stops and save that as well. Okay, so now I have 3 saved searches and I can start building some reports on my dashboard. So the first one I'm going to build is based on incidents. So maybe I'm interested to know within my department what kinds of incidents are actually occurring. So I'll choose incidents, and to figure that out I would like to count by incident type. So by default I get a vertical bar chart, which I almost always flip to horizontal because I can read the labels nicely. And it turns out that within my department anyway, auto burglars are number 1, towed vehicles 2, other number 3. Unfortunately, other is not very descriptive, but I can add a second level aggregation within Visallo. So in this case, I'll break down each of those incident types by their description. And so now I can see that other turns out to be 1/3 mental illness. Now, any of the bars on this chart I can click on, and 2 things will happen. I get the list of all the individual items that make it up, and if I click on them, they're shown in the inspector on the right. Or I can click the button to open it in search, which is a far more powerful thing. So what Visallo has done here is craft a search with criteria whose results represent all of the items in that segment of the bar. So the really powerful thing here is that you can add additional filters to really scope down the content that you're interested in looking at, and then maybe be able to bring that and pull it onto a new graph or a new map for some analysis. Okay, if I clear these things out, the next one I might want to do is, let's say we're interested in traffic stops and we want to know how they are distributed across gender, and maybe in a pie chart. So for here in Oakland, California, it turns out that 76% of my traffic stops are male and 24% are female. The next thing I might want to know is when are my calls for service happening? So when I choose calls for service, this time I'll do an aggregation, but instead of a count, we'll choose a histogram, which will show how things happen over time. And I'm interested to do that based on the call date. So by default, Visallo will pick a time range that's reasonable. In this case, maybe I want to see it by 7 days, so I change it to 7. And so here I see a distribution over time for all of the calls for service within my department. If I hover over any of the bars, I get the total. I also get the date range represented by that bar. If I click on any bar, similarly to the chart above, I get all of the individual search results. I could open that in a new search, add additional filters, so on and so forth. The last one I'm going to show is based on traffic stops. In this case, I'm interested to know where, geographically, are they occurring. So in this case, I will add a geo-coordinate cluster based on the geolocation property. So here you'll see I actually end up with a heat map visualization. If I click in here, I can zoom in to see where these are actually occurring. So most of the stops here are in the center of Oakland and then along the major highways. Any of these charts I could have given a different title simply by coming up into the title section and just say, in this case, traffic stops by location. One of the nice things about these being based on safe searches is that if you change the criteria of the search, the charts will change as well. To show you that, I'm going to come back over and we're going to load the incidents safe search criteria, and we're going to add some additional date filters. So maybe I'm not interested in incidents over all time, but I'm only interested maybe in the past 6 months. So in this case, I'm going to actually switch the date handling to relative dates. And I'm interested in all incidents that have occurred after a point in time that was 6 months ago, which is just another way of saying things that have happened within the last 6 months. So now I'm down to a little over 3,500 things. And if I come up to the Safe Search window and update the Safe Search criteria for that, come back over to my dashboard and hit the refresh button, you'll see my one chart that was based on incidents has changed. Whereas auto burglaries used to be number 1 within the last 6 months, turns out towed vehicles are number 1, followed by stolen vehicles, and of course our favorite other category as well. So the one great feature of this is that every time I come into Visallo, this particular chart is now going to update based on the last 6 months. So if I come in a month from now, it'll be the last 6 months from a month from now, and I don't have to continually change the search criteria. Now at some point, you're probably going to want to take one of these charts and put it in a report or a PowerPoint presentation or maybe a Word document or send it in an email. And with Visallo, that's really easy to do. So if you just click the export button, one of the option types here is for PNG, which is an image. So if I click on that and choose which size I want, and I'll click the export button, and if I click the bar here to open it, you'll see here is that actual chart in image form that I can use to paste into wherever I need it to go. All the other image types can be similarly exported. I could have also exported my graph as well. So let's say that I'm interested in this section specifically and how these two individuals are linked together as part of that same case. So here I can right click on my graph, choose to export it. I have a couple of additional options. So I can export all of the data backing up this graph as a CSV or a Microsoft Excel file, or I can get an image of the graph as well. So I can get an entire view, which is everything on the graph, or in this case where I'm zoomed in on these two specific suspects, I can just get the current view as well. I have an option to make the background transparent in case I don't want to put it on a white background, and then I can similarly click the export button. If I go ahead and open that, you'll now see here's an image of that, just that zoomed in current view of the graph for me to do whatever I need to do with it. Other things that can be exported are search results. So there's always an export button on search results, so you can get the CSV or the Excel out of search results. If you wanted to export records and data for just specific individuals, so if I select these two people, I can come over to my Open menu and I can export those as well to CSV or Microsoft Excel. I haven't shown every feature of Visallo, but I have shown most of the major ones. I hope you found this demo informative, and please contact us at www.visallo.com for more information.